So not only was I in a really weird headspace for this trip, but I was also a novice who didn't really have any of the benefits that we now have with advancements in technology. Advancements like Google Maps, eSIMs, Google Translate. Google has really helped make travel a lot easier. Expedia was around, and so was MapQuest. Girl, do you remember MapQuest? Yeah, this was the era of MapQuest. But the ease of connectivity wasn't there, which is a benefit when it comes to mental health and detachment, which I think is really important, especially in this day and age. But also a bit of a drawback when you're new to something and kind of guessing your way through it and making a lot of assumptions that can end up biting you in the butt later on. Case in point, my mother had me declared a missing person with the government of Canada when I went to Italy back in 2010 because I failed to call her when I landed. And in fact, I didn't call her to confirm my arrival until 2 days later. Yes, I know. I am a bad child and I am an extremely bad gay. I know. And you might be asking yourself, what kind of awful gay son does this to their mother? In my defense, I will say it was the one that assumed that people in Italy spoke English everywhere and that I could easily call collect or buy a calling card. And also the one that assumed that I could find like an internet cafe, which, were still popular back then. Like if y'all remember internet cafes, remember you go and you like rent a computer and you pay for internet and you can play games and shoot off emails, et cetera, that were, very popular back in the 2000s and early teens before smartphone technology, took off. So I thought I could, shoot off an email or something. I don't know. None of that happened though. None of that happened. And it wasn't until the second day that I befriended someone from England who let me use their phone that I was able to call my mom and confirm that the horrifying, kidnap murder scenarios that she had concocted and that had been running through her head had not, luckily come into fruition. Mama was upset. She was angry, darling. I have never heard my mother cry so hard and scream so loud in general and at me. And luckily I haven't ever since. So, very important lesson I learned right off the bat traveling on your own is you must always find a way to call your mother to confirm that you have not been Liam Neeson taken. No excuses. To this day, 14 years later, at the ripe old age of 41, Greek mama still expects a message when I land, which is obviously very easy now with Wi-Fi and eSIMs and all that, but nonetheless, she still expects it. And if not exactly when I land, within a reasonable time frame, sometime, within the day to confirm that I have not been, human trafficked. But back then, honey, darling, back then, you were flying off the grid. Okay, when you were gone, you were gone. And it's funny because even this, I guess you can say, lapse, in judgment, and yes, the ignorance that I demonstrated in my youthful age, making assumptions about a different country and the people there, being very Anglo-centric, being very North American centric, something that would bite me in the behind several times throughout this trip. Another seed, was definitely planted. It was, excuse me, it was the first serious mistake I made traveling. I've made other mistakes, but this is the first serious mistake I made while traveling. And it's one that I tell to everyone that compels me to talk about connectivity, when I discuss travel, eSIMs, portable Wi-Fi, etc., as well as the beginning of my running list of mistakes, that forms my unofficial tips and tricks list that I tell people about when they travel. And in some respects is the basis for my entire YouTube channel and one of the core pillars of gay solo travel. Talking to people about the mistakes that I've made so that they can avoid repeating those errors themselves, This moment in particular that I had with my mom was such an epic blunder that it kind of acts as like I said, like a pillar of why it is that I do what I do and why I love to talk about travel and why I like to help people with travel so they don't make these kinds of mistakes themselves. My mom was walked off the ledge and everything is fine. But yeah, if you're gay and traveling alone, you call your damn mother, okay? Or else you might be in a real world of hurt. No gay child is allowed to travel on their own, regardless of their age, without calling or emailing or texting their mother to confirm that they are still alive. No excuses. Very important lesson that I learned and that you must follow too. When I went to Italy in 2010, I was 27 years old, approaching 28, and this was the first time in my life that I truly felt independent. Yes, I was living on my own in Montreal at the time. I went to school in Montreal for my PhD. But there was something incredibly adult about walking the streets of Venice, utterly sleep deprived, in the emerging warmth of a very early spring. I went there middle to end of March in 2010 with a huge mountain equipment co-op backpack strapped to my back, eating like the best slice of pizza I ever had, wandering around a maze of buildings with no map and no destination and no clue about what to see or where I was going, that made me feel so in control, despite the fact that I had completely surrendered, all sense of control in some respects. And in retrospect, I realized that what I was experiencing was freedom. It was the first time when I couldn't be contacted or could to some degree contact anyone, or when no one knew where I was, my mother included, including, myself, kind of. Like, it was where I didn't have a destination to get to or a timeline, except for, catching the train to Gorizia, which I plan on doing, later on in the early evening, when I could eat or drink what I wanted, for whatever reason, whenever I wanted. It was also the first time that I learned that bathrooms in Europe aren't as readily available or accessible as they are in North America. Yeah, and as someone who drinks a lot of water and likes their coffee and needs to use the facilities quite often, needless to say, this became a bit of a problem that I had to resolve. In conjunction, this is also when I learned about a thing called paying to use the freaking toilet, and the importance, if not necessity, of carrying around change when you travel, in Europe, to avoid peeing or pooping your pants. Learning new cultural norms can be so much fun, can't they? So luckily I did neither. But I came close, dangerously close, a few times, in fact. So lots of fun in Venice. Lots of fun, lots of things to learn, along the way. Now, despite moments of near, embarrassing incontinence, the beauty of travel before social media and smartphone connectivity, where now you can even download apps that direct you to public bathrooms, is that you learned via trial by fire, right? You learned on the go, which added an extra element of adventure and spice, along with an extra dose of anxiety. Now, despite the plethora of information out there, I do like doing my research. I really do, but I always try not to overplan or overlearn about my destinations because I still like a bit of drama. I like a little bit of chaos. I like a little bit of risk. Not much, but just a bit, just the tip, if you will. So when I left Venice, I arrived in Gorizia and walked up to the bed and breakfast that the conference had booked for me, which was close to Gorizia's main square and the university itself. And again, I don't know why I was expecting this small city in northeastern Italy to function like a North American city, but I did. Youthful ignorance. And again, this is one of the reasons why you travel. If you don't travel, you can watch all the movies in the world and you can read all the stories in the world, but there's something about being immersed in a different place that really teaches you and kicks that what's the word I'm looking for? That I guess that centric view that you have of where you grew up and where you live, and assuming that the world sort of operates similarly, it really kicks it out of you really quickly. But, after waiting around for a bus that never showed up, I pulled out one of the maps that I had printed off before I left. I did do that. I did print out some maps before I left. And I made my way north from the train station to my accommodation. Now, when I arrived, I went to open the door only to find that it was locked. Okay. I rang the doorbell and an older woman greeted me. And she invited me in, while also chastising me for being so late, advising me that, if I had arrived any later, I would basically have had to sleep on the streets because she was basically getting ready to go to bed soon. So another lesson I learned, accommodations in Italy, but in a lot of places, do not operate like a North American chain. It's not a Hilton or a Sheraton or a Best Western. There are check-in times. There isn't 24-hour desks, services. There isn't a concierge that's always there. And you're also expected to advise property managers of your arrival times, which I guess maybe the conference did based on my plane arrival time. I think they asked me when my plane was arriving, so maybe they assumed that I was going to be coming to Gorizia earlier. I didn't know. So anyways, I got my room key. I went to my room. I showered and then collapsed on my twin bed, with a spring mattress and fell asleep. And I did not wake up for 13 hours. I didn't wake up for 13 hours. I literally put my head on that pillow and just collapsed. When I woke up the next morning, I felt like I was hit by a ton of bricks. This is the first time I had experienced that kind of sleep deprivation and jet lag at the same time. Oh, and the dehydration too. Marron, the dehydration. I peed out mustard the next morning. I just did not have enough water. I slept for 13 hours. So yeah, that was about to happen. But, after getting myself together, showering, putting on clothes, I made my way downstairs to speak to the property owner, only to find that a basket of bread, butter, jam, and prosciutto had been laid out for me. And the owner said that she, knew that I was finally awake because, she heard my footsteps. The room that I had was apparently like on top of the kitchen. So when she heard me basically, get up and start walking or stomping around, she, got my breakfast ready for me so I could start eating right away. And she also told me that she, was brewing some fresh coffee for me. I mean, those Italian grandmothers, they just know when you need food and they just know how to take care of you. The food was simple, but sumptuous. The butter was amazing. The ham was delicious. Oh, and the coffee. The coffee was from a Moka pot, which I didn't know what it was back then. But oh my God, it was exactly what I needed to get myself back on track. Like, that woman knew how to make a mean cup of coffee. And to this day, when I feel nostalgic about travel or when I want to take myself out of my day-to-day life and metaphysically send myself, to Italy or back to Italy, I brew a cup of Illy coffee in my Moka pot. I went and bought one. And I imagine that I'm back at this large wooden table, in Gorizia. that I'm in this kitchen, that is lined with postcards and wooden spoons and hanging bulbs of garlic, that I'm talking to this B&B owner about, life in Gorizia before and after it became a part of Italy. This woman, this property owner, by the way, was like well over 100, years old. So she had some stories to tell about life in this city and how it had changed over throughout the 20th century. And I was so compelled by her stories and by the sights and sounds and tastes of Italy that I decided to forego the first day of the conference. Very professional, I know, very professional. And instead I decided to explore the city and also not call my mother. So decided to not go to the conference and not call my mother, and decided to just kind of wander around the city because I was so inspired. Gorizia was the first, I want to say, typical European city I ever explored. And I say typical because although Venice was my first European city to explore, it's not a very typical city. It's very unique and onto itself. Gorizia was the first kind of like real, European city that wasn't, this, unique, global entity. And as a typical European city, the city features a castle on a mountain in the city center. But I decided to hold off on seeing the castle, and instead I decided to just kind of aimlessly wander around the streets, for a little bit. And this is when I somehow found my way or made my way into Slovenia, passing through, a tunnel that acted as a gateway through the Italian-Slovenian border. And I should say that I do tend to travel with music in my ears. I don't like necessarily the quiet, or depending on where you are, the noise. So I do tend to sort of listen to music in my ears. Generally speaking, I would listen to sort of like high energy trance music. I have a set of trance sets from Armin van Buuren and Tiesto and a few other DJs, Johan Heelen, that I have that I really, really enjoy. It's almost now, I don't listen to them when I'm in Toronto, but I actually tend to listen to them when I travel. They're kind of like my travel playlist. But yeah, I remember walking around walking through this tunnel, and then I made my way over to like this gas station to buy a bottle of water or something. And then everything in there was just a different language. And I was like, what the hell is going on here? And it wasn't until I exited and then turned around and like retraced my footsteps that I saw the EU sign welcoming me into Italy, which of course on the other side was a sign welcoming me into Slovenia, but I guess I wasn't paying attention to that. So again, not knowing much about the EU, I panicked, and I very quickly made my way back over the border into Italy because I didn't have my passport, and not knowing at the time, what the Schengen zone was, or that Slovenia had joined in 2007. Removing the border security between the two countries, I just kind of panicked and ran back into Italy and was like, oh my God, please, I don't need this right now. I've already been dealing with enough things sort of happening. I don't need to, get tripped up by border security. Again, lots of learning on the go, and again, it wasn't until the following day that I made friends with the person I met from Finland, the one who let me, use her phone, where she explained to me how travel, in and around the EU actually worked. By this point, just the wanderings that I had done had brought me into like the later afternoon. And this is when I decided to grab a cup of coffee and head up to the mountain to see the castle. And this is also where I learned another important lesson. Large cups of coffee to go are not available everywhere, especially in Italy. In Italy, no, you either sit for an espresso-based coffee, or you stand at the bar and drink it. You shoot it back and off you go. You do not get a takeaway cup full of drip coffee that you take, with you, which is, a very common practice and cultural thing here, in particular in North America, right? We grab our cup of Starbucks, our cup of Timmy's, our cup of whatever, and we head out for a walk. So I sat at some random cafe, because that's usually what I do when I don't really plan out meals or drinks or anything. I don't even to this day, I don't really do a lot of research about like food or drinks. I'm not a foodie. I don't really care. It's usually when I'm like, I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I want this right now. It's like, what's the first thing in front of me? And I just kind of chance it. So I sat down and I got a cappuccino, and I remember getting a bag of chips as well, because the chips that I ended up buying had like a picture of Homer Simpson on them, and I love the Simpsons. So I'm just like, okay, I'm going to get this just for the branding. And I went to take a small sip of the small cup of the cappuccino that I got, and I accidentally drank the whole double shot of espresso in one gulp. You know, like I tried to suck off some of the foam and just drank the whole thing. So I remember thinking to myself, you know, that I was just a little disappointed and kind of unsatisfied, because I was really craving like a big cup of coffee. Like, that's what I wanted, not this little tiny thing. Anyways, I remember paying, and that this place must have been close to the mountain, because I remember like making my way up to the mountain, pretty quickly afterward. And funny enough, a few minutes later, I started to feel really good, and I'm like, like this little bit of cardio exercise, was doing my body good. Even though I had been walking like crazy, there maybe just, going up this hill was just giving me that extra little endorphin push that I needed. And with each passing minute that went by, I remember just feeling like better and healthier and happier and more energized. Like, oh girl, like I feel great. And I was, walking fast, and my heart was beating fast, and it felt like I was Zeus heading back to the top of Mount Olympus. I felt godlike. Of course, I know now that it was really just that jolt of caffeine, that burst of energy was just the espresso, pushing itself through my bloodstream. But at the time, I felt like it was the fresh Italian air and the Mediterranean sun that was invigorating my spirit. And I remember getting to the top of this central mountain, and I felt simply gobsmacked. The view from up above from this Italian city was something I had honestly never seen before, right? It was sublime. I just remember standing there looking outward, my digital camera in hand. Remember digital cameras? Yep. And I just remember feeling such a level of awe and just so at peace. And, this moment here is what I call like a real sliding doors moment in quotations, This is a sliding doors moment that I mentioned in the beginning of this episode, because it was here that I decided that I was going to drop out of my PhD program and move back to Toronto. It's something that just came over me when I was standing up there and looking at this view. I remember looking at all those terracotta rooftops. Terracotta is, those roofs, the typical sort of like Southern European roofs that those, and I guess like you can see them in California as well. It's, I guess you can Google it, but they look like little waves that are all put together on a roof. I don't know how to explain it much better than that, but if you don't know what I mean, look it up. But I was just looking at those terracotta roofs and, the rolling green hills in the background. And all I could think is, I killed myself over the last 3 years to get out of debt, to pay off like $30,000 or $35,000 in student loan debt that I had accrued during undergrad. And I had started plunging myself back into an almost $10,000 debt for a PhD in the humanities, when I could have spent that money traveling and seeing things like this instead. Like, instead, I spent it on tuition and a studio apartment, and I still have 5 years of this ahead of me? No. Like, absolutely no. Like, this was just not gonna happen. I was not gonna do this. This was a very transformative moment, in my life. It really, really, really was. And I have an affinity for views from high places, and I still do. And this, I think, is one of the most important of my entire life. there is a version of me in another timeline who really did drop out. But the version of me in this timeline that you're listening to right now did not actually drop out. Because on my last day in Italy, I ended up receiving an email. I had ended up using a computer at the university, I guess, to check my email. And I remember receiving notice via email that advised me that I had actually won some awards that came with money, and that I had also been awarded some teaching contracts, which included some TAing opportunities as well as teaching my own classes. And so there was going to be, enough money for me to continue my studies, as well as pay down my debt a little bit. And that also meant that I could, continue to apply for more jobs, once, jobs beget jobs, experience begets experience. And that I could also continue to apply for like larger scholarships and awards the following years to continue to fund myself. I was happy, of course, to receive this news. But truth be told, I almost considered rejecting the funding and dropping out anyways. Because this email came a few days after, I had resolved to drop out. And because for the last few days before then, which I will talk about, I had been living like I was going to drop out. I think I basically presented my research and then didn't really attend much of the conference afterward, like maybe here and there, for some of the get-togethers and events just to meet people. But the sense of freedom and liberation I felt removing the heavy chains of academia and the financial strain of figuring out how I was going to fund 5 years of graduate school, if not more, it just felt so good. And I just really didn't want to reshackle myself to this boulder. But I did. And sometimes I wonder about that version of me, of myself, who committed to dropping out, Like, I wonder, what's his life like now? Where is he? What is he doing? Is he living in the same city? Is he doing similar work? Is he living somewhere else? Is he married? I wonder about this other version of me that, decided to drop out, or that maybe didn't end up getting that money, but really would have been, committing to dropping out because the money would have came, regardless. It was my decision that is that sliding door moment. So I don't know. I mean, maybe one day I'll write a story about this other version of me and who went on to live a very different life, to move back to Toronto and, I don't know, got a job, travel the world. I have no idea what that version of me did, but every once in a while I still think about what life would have been like had I made, that different decision. And I don't know. I'm curious if anyone else feels the same way. Like, sometimes when you travel, you get these urges to stay and not go back, or sometimes you have epiphanies, or you meet someone. A lot of time people meet someone when they're traveling and they make them a partner and they move or they get married. But I'm curious, for other gay solo travelers, like, have you had a moment like this, a moment while you were traveling, a view, an experience, a meeting of someone that, made you want to change your life, or that makes you feel like there's a version of you in another timeline that is living a different life? I'm curious. I doubt that I'm the only one, but I'd love to know more if this is something that others, have felt too.